Hey everybody, it's Neenah and welcome to day one of the Valentine's Day card series for 2022. So let's go ahead and get started. Today I'm using products from the Ink Blot Shop and we're going to be doing some stenciling. So I'm using the Pixel Grid with Pixel Grid mask, and this is a very liney kind of stencil, so I did make sure to spray it down with some Pixie spray. And I'm also going to be using Distress Oxide inks in Tattered Rose, Barn Door, and Espresso. Now this is a great color combination for your Valentine's Day cards, but I also feel like you can use this outside of your Valentine's Day cards, especially if you're making a masculine card. I think brown works perfectly with that. So once I get the stencil in place, I'm going to come in first with the Distress Oxide ink, and I'm going to start with the Tattered Rose. Now you can fill in this entire stencil, but I was playing around with it, and I like the fact that I can skip over some areas, make some areas lighter or darker, and it kind of gives a great variation. So as you can see here, I'm starting off kind of light towards the center, but then when you see I get towards the bottom, I really start intensifying that color. I think this stencil would look gorgeous as well if you just laid over like glitter gel and just gave this a really simple but sparkly background. I think it's just perfect and very, very versatile to use. So I'm just adding light and dark marks on here, adding more pressure and lighter pressure in other areas so I can get a good gradient on here. Once I pull back that stencil, I'm going to have this really great design. So as you can see, I have some light areas and some dark areas, and it just gives me such a gorgeous background. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and step this up. Within this stencil kit, you're going to get a couple more designs and masks that line up perfectly with this grid line. I think Tiffany came up with a brilliant idea of making sure to have everything lined up and gives you so many different options with this stencil set. So as you can see here, I have a heart, and this heart is going to line up within that grid, so you can now have another design on top of that gridded background. I think it's just genius. And also within this kit, you'll see a little bit later, there's also another option to add a few more hearts to this. Now I did want to make sure just to use a couple pieces of purple tape to make sure that this stencil did not move when I go to apply my ink. Now you can also use Pixie spray if you wanted to on this, but it held just perfectly using some of that purple tape. So now I'm going to come in with the Barn Door, which is a gorgeous red color, and I'm going to be able to add a heart design right over this grid. But if you do it lightly, you'll be able to still see the grid line through the heart that I'm making. So I'm adding, different variations of pressure, some light, some dark, but either way, you're still going to see that gorgeous grid pattern right on top of or right underneath that gorgeous heart. So when I pull this back, you're going to see that the heart lines up perfectly with those grid lines. And look how pretty that is. I love this stencil, you guys. I really, really do. I mean, I can just envision the color combinations that I can do with this. And you can see that all of the grid squares work perfectly with the grid that's in the background. Now, since we have this panel done, I want to come in with some sentiments. Since I don't want to cover up that heart too much with the sentiment, I am using the Ink Blot Shop's sentiment label blocks. This is perfect because you have just the sentiments, but then you also have the sentiments in like the reverse of it, where you're going to have more color, and then the sentiment is actually engraved back into the stamp itself. So I did make sure to grab out a few of these just so I have options. Now remember, anytime you're making a whole bunch of these, you can save them for later projects. So I'm going to pick out about 3 sentiments that's going to give me some options to put on this card, and I can also save those for later. So remember, when you have these sentiments out, go ahead and make a bunch of them. They will save you time when you're creating later. And if you put them in more a neutral color palette, maybe like grays, blacks, browns, they will match up pretty much with any other card that you make. But you know, once you have them out, make good use of them. I would even go ahead and maybe stamp all of these out, and then I'll have them for future cards. I will line that up, and the paper I'm using for everything today is just Neenah Solar White 110-pound cardstock. I just felt the need to maybe have a heavier cardstock when I was doing some of this blending. Now these are solid images, so I do want to go ahead and condition them. And by conditioning them, I'm just actually rubbing my finger over them and my palm to kind of get off some of the residue that is on stamps when you first get them. So for my ink today, I am going to use Distress Oxide ink. And this is in ground espresso. So remember, when we have those inks, we think, you know, Distress Oxides, we can do blending with them, but you can also stamp with them as well. So keep that in mind. I am going to make sure to stamp this well though, because when you're using these kind of inks, you might end up getting some blotchiness on them. So to achieve a better or more crisp look, you just want to stamp them twice. As you can see, I'm just gently walking my fingers over that image. And you can see the first time I do it, I do have a little bit of blotchiness in this. Now, if you like that look, totally stop right here. I do like that look if I'm doing like mixed media work. But if I'm kind of doing it on a card, I kind of want more of a crisp image. So I can go ahead and close down my Misty lid. And that's what's so great about using a Misty, because I know I'm going to have everything lined up. And I'll press that down again. Now again, I'm not pressing too hard because I don't want to bloom any of this out. But as you can see, you can get great impressions stamping with that Distress Oxide ink. Now I do want to make sure that I dry this back just a little bit because I did stamp it twice and I know that it's still a little bit wet. Made sure to dry that back, and then I'm going to come in with this little mini trimmer. This is from Tonic Studio and Tim Holtz, and it's so precious. I'm going to use the guide on there to help me trim down these pieces, just to leave a little bit of a white border around each one of them. This trimmer is a lifesaver in my craft room now. And now I have all of these sentiments that I can use on future cards because I'm just going to use one on this card. Now to keep everything seamless in my color palette, I'm going to come in with that ground espresso one more time, and I'm just going to add some color around this white piece of cardstock. This is just going to bring in that chocolate brown that we just used on our sentiment, and this is just going to guarantee that my color palette is going to be seamless. I didn't have the right brown for this, so I just decided to make my own paper. So as you can see, I only went it around the border of this. Nobody's going to know that the center of this is not colored. So just remember, if you're struggling to find a cardstock that's going to match what you've stamped, just use the ink and create your own cardstock. I did make sure to heat set this because there was a lot of ink on this paper. And now once I put the heart panel on top, you can't even tell that this was just not a piece of chocolate colored cardstock. So now I can bring in one of the sentiments. So remember, I stamped out a few of these. So it's going to give me options on what I want to put in the center of this heart. Now I am going to use some of these sentiments a little bit later on another card I'm going to share with you. But this just gives me a little bit of pop of that brown to put right in the center of my heart. Now I did want to make sure that I just pop this up a little bit, so I'm using some thin foam strips for this, and I'll link to these because I found a really good deal on Amazon for these, and I keep about 2 or 3 packages now in my craft space. So I'll go ahead and add that strip right to the middle of my heart. And I don't want to add a lot to this card. I really want the stencil to work its magic, and I don't want to really cover this up with a lot of things. So I'm going to just add a few Ellen Hutson's, these are heart gems, and they're clear, so they're going to match perfectly. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into our second card. I am going to start off with, again, a piece of cardstock, and I'm going to use one of the additional stencils within that panel grid stencil package. I do want to make sure that I tape down my cardstock onto my glass mat so it does not move. And as you can see in that stencil, there's going to be 3 additional hearts. Now you can use this with the grid, or I'm going to show you how you can just go ahead and use it first, and then you can add your grid later. So one more time, I am going to tape this down with the purple tape, and that's just going to hold it in place. And I'm going to first start out with that ground espresso. Now with this grid design, you can totally just use the hearts, and it's going to kind of give a different shape to your standard heart where like the corners are circled. This is definitely going to be more of a blocky style, but it's very easy to line up and overlap these because of the style of the stencil. So as you can see, I went ahead and did my first heart, and now I'm going to come right back in and I'm going to overlap this. And as you can see, it's so easy to do because I can see like those little squares within each piece. So now I can go ahead and hold that in place, and I'm going to come back in with that barn door. Again, the color palette is going to be very simple, and I do feel like you can use this for a masculine or feminine card. So I just hold that in place, and I can go right over that brown with that red. And I know everything's going to line up because again, it kind of mimics a grid. So as you can see, I can attach that red heart, and now I'm going to come back in and I'm going to attach a pink heart. So as you can see, everything lines up. That's what's so cool about this grid, is that you can totally overlap things if you want. So I have the larger heart, the middle-sized heart, and then I'm going to go to the smaller heart. So there's 3 sizes on here that easily work together. So I'm going to line up those little corners of the grid that make up that little X, and then I can come back in with that red. Just add in that color, and I know that my hearts are going to overlap because the grid is going to show me that. And look how pretty that is. Now you can totally go all the way across this border if you wanted to, but I just want to have those 3 hearts kind of lined up. Now I will come back in and bring in the larger grid. Remember the grid that we used earlier. This is just another way to use that grid. The first card, I put the grid down first. For this one, I'm going to lay it on top of my hearts. Bring it back in that tattered rose, and I'm not going to go all over this. I'm just going to kind of fill in some of the areas where the hearts kind of meet up. And I'm not actually blending per se. I'm just kind of tapping in that ink color instead of doing a full blend or a full wash of color. And again, I'm just going to place that ink where the hearts meet up, just so you can see that there is a design and there is a grid pattern with this. So I'm going to just lightly put that in, and when I pull this off, you're going to see that grid, but you're not going to see it all over the paper. You're just going to kind of see where it marries up with those hearts. Now I can go ahead and trim down this panel, and I actually think this might be my favorite because I like having the grid not really be overpowering on this, and the color is just maybe from corner to corner and it's not filled. So it really allows my hearts to kind of stand up a little bit better. So I could put this white on white and that would be great, but I decided I wanted to add a little bit of color to the sides. So one more time, I'm just going to grab another piece of white cardstock, and I'm just going to bring in that barn door just to the sides of the panel. Again, remember, nobody's going to know that this is not a full colored panel. I just brought it in on the sides, just so when I put down my card, I'm going to have a little bit of that red peeking through on the sides. And look how easy that is. That's totally easy to add that coordinating color without having to worry about cardstock that matches. I will use a wet adhesive to go ahead and place this down in the middle. And I'll have to tell you, if you guys want to have cards that are totally different for Valentine's Day, I highly, highly, highly suggest using this pixel grid. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. Now remember, I stamped out those sentiments from before. Remember I said hold on to those because you can use them for future cards. And I think I might just want to use the hugs and kisses on this one and leave the I love you for a card a little bit later. So now I can go ahead and pop these up as well. And again, this is a totally simple card to do. You can do it with a bunch of color palettes. Don't forget that Christina and I had the color palettes from Christmas. You might be able to pull in some of those colors and maybe swap out one or two of the colors, and it would totally match for your Valentine's Day. Now all I have to do is place on my sentiments and this card's going to be done. Now over on my blog, I'm going to have some close-up pictures of these cards, and I also have an additional card using the same color palette using a stamp set from Ink Blot Shop. So make sure to head on over there. I'll make sure to link all the products below, and I'm going to have a special treat for you a little bit later in the card series that's going to stretch this color palette. All right, everybody, that is the card for today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in video number 2 soon. Take care, everybody, and have a great day.